on today's podcast.
Your beginnings, or if you haven't failed a few times, or if you don't realize you fail a little bit forward every day, and that's my point, fail a little bit forward.
The truth is, adding value will never go out of style.
This podcast is brought to you by iWatch Security. iWatch Security. Get the savings and service that you deserve.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for another Five Things podcast. I'm here with our third time, Jim. It's a real honor to have you anytime we get a chance to talk. It's always good catching up. Jim Allen, founder of the Jim Allen Group. You've sold, I'm guesstimating, I know it was your team did over $1 billion last year in real estate transactions, and I'm guesstimating probably 8 to 12 billion in your lifetime, something like that?
Yeah, so somebody asked me that not long ago, and I really hadn't ever sat down and figured it out, and I think we're right around 12 to 14. I think that's right. And you know what? At some point, I'll go back and figure it out. It's not a big deal to us,
Sure.
but people always ask, and I hear a lot of people now talking about becoming $1 billion agent. Well, they mean in their whole career, and gosh, we've been that for a long time.
Right.
We do that now annually.
Right.
I can't wait 10 years from now. Somebody's going to ask them, I don't know, maybe 25
30,
or 30,
40 billion.
Who knows?
That's pretty awesome. So obviously fair to say you've got some experience in the real estate market.
Yes, sir.
Again, top producer in North Carolina since 96, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes, sir.
something like that. And
Yes,
top 25 in the nation last year, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Yeah, I think I was like 10th or 11th.
which is awesome.
And when we say the nation, it's really the world, because ours is the biggest real estate organization there is. So it is unique. And Real Trends magazine does the numbers for everybody. So it's exciting to see where you're going to fall every year.
That is awesome. And I know how you are. You're actually very humble and always willing to help people out. And that's why I appreciate you coming back on the podcast, because there's so much to talk about since we talked last 2 years ago,
Isn't it funny that the people that you meet and that you do a lot of business with, and most pretty successful people, tend to be humble and tend to really be people trying to help other people. And as you try to help others, it ultimately helps you.
Isn't that funny? And it's you hear a lot of noise out there, and I don't know, we've always talked about anything and everything, and there's a lot of people that have this, what I call it, a victim mentality, that I believe the media a lot of places, let's say the media, maybe some institutions, they try to shove this thought process down on people that wealthy people are all greedy and self-serving, and certainly there are some of those people. I've met some. But the majority of very successful people that I've personally met have been very giving, very community-oriented, very willing to take their time and share with people. And I find you're that way.
Well, you actually, if you're a leader in whatever you're doing, you have a responsibility to give back, not only to your profession, but to the community you grow up in. And I think really most super successful people you'll meet, they didn't set out to be super successful. What they did was they wanted to have a nice business. And what they realized as they started helping other people, their sphere and their network starts growing. And, I used to hear the word philanthropy when I was young and didn't have any money. And I was like, oh gosh, no one would really ever give money to someone else for no reason. And you know what? I can't even tell you the large volume that we do now every year. And you know what? You find there are so many people in need. Like, one of my biggest causes, the Boys and Girls Club in Wake Forest. And annually, we've just started giving more and more. I started annual scholarships so that, they have a way to go to college now. We do things, but physically the buildings need things. So when they visited us a few weeks ago, not only did we give out our next scholarship, but they had some physical needs. So I wrote them another $20,000 check and just said, look, whatever you need, you go do it, because what you're doing is so much more important than what I do in my business. And that's just part of what happens as you level up in your life and you're wanting to keep your life fairly normal. What you start really noticing is some other people's aren't. And you want those people to be wherever you are. And I think most entrepreneurs start their businesses so that other people can be employed. And then, all I ever hear is how horrible it is that these people make all this money. Think about all the people they're employing, all the people they're putting to work that depend on them.
Right.
And we want to go tax the businesses so dramatically that they can't do business anymore. And that's crazy. We should be giving them tax incentives because they're creating livelihoods for other people. And if you don't see it that way, then those people will stay at whatever station they're at because they've already made theirs, and they'll just stay comfortable. And why take any more risk?
Throw it neutral.
Right. I'll keep it like it is. Or if you really have an awful lot of money and people start talking to you about it, then, okay, I'll tell you what, while y'all decide how you're going to tax people, I'm going to take a time out. I'm going to put my money over here on a shelf. I'm not going to stick any more in anything. I'm going to stay neutral. And our economy will not move if that's what we do.
Right.
Now, if the folks at the very bottom of the economic scale could create enough new businesses and employ enough new people, then I would say, let's give them all the tax incentives. But the truth is, people who've already started businesses or have business plans in place to start things that employ people need help. That's the thing we should get behind as a society.
You bring up a really good point because, obviously with social media, you get to interact with a lot of people that think differently, which I'm always okay with. I can always agree to disagree, but I like the conversation. I want to know that I'm seeing things clearly and making good decisions, right, as a business owner. But there's a mentality out there that, again, we got to tax the rich. Okay, I certainly want everybody to pay their taxes. I mean, we can agree on that. I'm sure you're in the same boat.
Absolutely.
However, the folks that, for example, talk about a living wage and minimum wage of 15 an hour, this and that. So, okay, well, how many people are you employing? Oh, 0. Everybody that works for me makes way more than that.
Right.
Maybe they didn't start there, but as my company grows, everybody in the company wins. I just literally 2 people this week got pay raises. I was reviewing with Julie, who, by the way, you told me you need to pay her more 2 or 3 years ago, and you were 100% right, and I did it, and she's number 1 in the company, like a total rock star. Thank you for the great advice. I was looking at what we're paying people, and I was a little shocked, to be honest. And I was like, whoa. And I felt proud and good about it because we've had employees that are buying houses. I'm talking to our young staff about credit and, debt to income ratio and things like that. I want to coach up my family.
And it is your family.
Right.
And there is a responsibility with it. And I think most business owners like yourself, I think we start feeling like we're responsible for this generation of people that are coming with us, and they should. The reason I was a little bit late getting here today, I was actually speaking to one of the people on my team who's been with me since she was 21 and she's 32 now, and we were having a conversation about how, as I plan my business going forward, she's an integral. I have to always think about where is her next space within my organization, and how will I help her get to this next level? And one of the things we were talking about today is now that her income is at another level, teaching her and helping her better to invest that money so that that money also starts working for her in addition to her salary gain, because she doesn't need the entire amount of money she's making now. And I, instead of just blowing it on fun things, I'm trying to get involved with her and get her to understand that, your money can be employed as well as you can. And let's try to figure out safe ways for you to do that. And I know that's not my responsibility, but it is. As a parent, you would give that to your children. Why, as a business leader, wouldn't you give that to your employees? I think that top-down mentality from that direction is very positive. But the way I view my company and how I function is similar to how you do. From a bottom up, I feel like there's nothing anybody at the entry level does that I'm not willing to do all the way up. And, that starts by simple stuff. Like if there's a piece of trash on the floor, I pick it up and put it away. I don't say, hey, you go pick up X, Y, Z. Or if I see a sign down laying in the mud somewhere, I pick it up, clean it off to set the example that you do this the next time.
Right.
And why wouldn't we?
Right.
Why does anybody ever get to a point that they're too good to do the things that got you there?
Well, and I think if a business owner gets that ego and they feel like they're the person and they're going to start losing their people.
Their business will collapse.
And that's the interesting thing is like this narrative out there about business people or businesses need to be doing this. I want to do that for my staff, number one, because I care about people. But number two, it's kind of in my own best interest to do it as well. So I think when you do have those people that maybe are selfish and self-serving, and they will tell people to do things that they don't want to do anymore, and they're not willing to lead by example, your organization will start unraveling at some point, and I've seen it multiple times. So
always,
I hate this narrative out there, and I was just talking to Mustafa recently about virtue signaling and hypocrisy. Those are the two things that really I have to really try to refrain the way I approach some of these conversations, because I'm definitely a natural smartass, and I have to really think to myself, what's my goal here? Do I want to win an argument, or do I want to help humanity level up a little bit? If I'm right. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm willing to have the conversation, and maybe I'll discover that, because I'm always open-minded about perspectives.
It's funny, you must have snuck into my office meeting yesterday morning, because exactly what you're saying is what we were talking about yesterday. And I believe that communication can only happen when we communicate. Like a lot of times when I hear someone say things that I know are just blatantly out in left field, if I go really engage, or I put something on Facebook that's just absolutely derogatory to answer back to them, now we're in a war instead of us discussing it. And the reality is, if I have an opinion that's different than yours and I attack you with my opinion, there's no chance that we're going to reach a plane in between. And I think you mature through your business and other ways. And here's my deal. If you're someone who doesn't want everybody to succeed, if you care what a person's skin color is, if you care what culture they're from, if those things matter to you, you're in the wrong world. God created all of us, and we are all exactly the same organically inside. And a lot of times, because of where you are in your life, if you're successful, people think you're immediately a bigot. You're immediately someone who is racist, or something's wrong with you. And it's not true.
It's the opposite,
It's the
typically.
absolute opposite, because you would have never had that success if you didn't value everyone. And that's something that culturally I've tried to explain. And, one of the videos we did yesterday in our office, everyone that spoke a different language, and we had, I think 8 people were there yesterday that their primary language is something different than English. We did a little video yesterday saying we want to do a welcome home to everybody. If you don't hear your language or your dialect spoken today, come join my team and let's make sure we've got everybody covered. And guys, if you're out there looking for a house and nobody's sponsoring or talking to you, please call us, because the only way I'm going to grow my world is to help the whole world grow. And that's where we're at mindset wise. Like, if you're only willing to help this certain type of people, you're going to run out of those certain types of people quickly. And you know what? When you think that way, that's going to shrink that much more. You know, and that's why it's so sad sometimes when I see people who have become somewhat disenfranchised. They polarize themselves further, and then the people who are trying to reach out feel polarized from them as well. And it's all about both people not being heard by each other. And so I think we have to open dialogue. Like, it's interesting when I listen to people debate. Like, for example, right now, the presidential debate, the first one that went on.
If you can call it that.
It wasn't really. It was a one side answered questions and the other one was lost in the conversation. And obviously the other person's party realized it and have taken him off the ticket now. But they knew it before that debate occurred. It just was unfortunately, it was sad to have to watch.
Yeah.
And I felt bad for both sides. I really did, because if you had been on the side that knew what was going on and you preyed on the person who was weakly discussing things, then you look bad. And on the other side, the person who was just pathetic, I felt like my mom had Alzheimer's. So I felt like later in her life, people stopped treating her as a person. I wanted to go reach out and grab him and say, hey, it's okay. What you're going through, a lot of people are going through. They just aren't the president right now.
You know, and I don't want to lose. There was something I want to say about the other topic, but I'm sure we'll get on this at some point. It is 2024. It's an election year, but the sad thing to me is that the same people that were saying how sharp he was, they were clearly lying to us, whether it's the media, the mainstream media, because there's plenty of alternative media that's been exposing this for years. It's a shame that somebody could be propped up as important of a position as president that is clearly not there. And this has been going on for a while. This wasn't a new development. This has been like this for a while, and they knew it and they lied about it. The reason why they had to make the change is because it was exposed and obvious to everybody now.
Well, I'll tell you what's terrible. So I have some close personal friends who have been diagnosed with dementia, and they run big companies right now. And their company has been covering for them as well. And it's been going on for a few years now, and it's becoming more and more apparent how bad it is. And the person can't help it. I mean, they're completely helpless to it, but everyone around them is afraid, and that person doesn't want to lose what they've got. Like one of your biggest fears when you realize you're having any kind of cognitive decline is losing it. And you'll fake it, you'll fight it any way you can. The people closest to you feel it first, and they know. And unfortunately, some of those people in a business organization, I can't speak to the company because I only see it in business mind, but I'm watching some of these people in their businesses, and their businesses have already retracted 30 and 40%. They used to be leaders in an industry, and now they're falling down to the level of everyone else because no new leader has stepped in with a path and a direction to follow. Instead, that person that was the leader has just diminished their role and no one stepped in. So the people that work there don't really know who they work for anymore. A lot of the new employees don't even know who owns that company. They haven't met yet. And since there hasn't been an active voice, they also went through multiple different sales managers during that process because no one had the ultimate power. And so when people come in and there's no one that's the decision maker because no one's capable of making it, they don't make as many, and they keep adding staff so that somebody's going to be the miracle worker. And unfortunately, it gets to a point where it's too late. And fortunately, I believe that's what happened with our government right now. But in business, I'm watching some friends of mine that's happening in right now. Having been through it with my own mom, I've tried to lean in to help. And unfortunately, just like any other illness, any disease, mental or physical, until people are really willing to accept health or capable of accepting it, or someone around you that loves you steps in and says, hey, like in our president's case, his wife or someone else who really cares says, you know, I know you're not capable anymore, honey, but you're capable of other things. Let's go do these things instead. That's what needs to happen to these other leaders I know in business. But if the person's divorced, if the person has gotten away from their neo family, the only people they have is their staff that works with them, and maybe they didn't groom or raise those people to be next.
And maybe the relationship is not one that there's love and respect there, to where, you know, the number 2 or number 3, number 4 people in the company, they won't say anything because maybe they're milking it. Maybe they don't love the organization enough to say, hey, Bob, about, you know, making up a name here, but Bob, have you thought about this? You know, this is going on. Let me give you 10 examples of, you know, maybe it's time to think about something different.
And you know what? Sometimes that organization is trying to just keep moving forward, and what you'll notice in those organizations is you don't see that person as often. Like, I mean, quite honestly, during this last 4 years of presidency, our president's probably spoken to us the least amount that I can remember in the history of time.
Yeah.
Or at least in my history of
by
time.
design, clearly.
Right, by design,
Yeah.
because obviously there was a problem there. But we didn't have someone else, either the vice president or, you know, someone else on staff. No one was standing up and speaking. So we've kind of just been in a boat going down the waterway, and
No
since
rudder.
the economy had been set up great, we're just rolling down the river and hoping that it keeps happening.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to jump into a topic I definitely want to get into, but I personally believe one of the largest problems that this world has, more or less this country, is the lack of a real media. But we'll come back to that if you don't mind. I want to finish up the thought on because we're inadvertently talking around the DEI topic prior to moving into that. And the way I look at it is, I believe the way most reasonable people look at it is, I don't care about any of that stuff. I don't care about skin color. You know, if you like to be tied up and spanked, like, none of that stuff matters to me. Are you going to be good to our customers? Are you going to show up on time? Are you going to work hard? Are you going to treat people good? All of those, you know, it comes back to 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You major on the majors. And I think in society, when things get so good, because capitalism does work, and things are so good in the West, we can focus on all these minors. So we're not majoring on the majors, you know, our 34 trillion in debt, potential wars with major nuclear powers. We're not majoring on the majors. We're majoring on pronouns, and we're majoring on, you know, skin color. And I should hire someone because of their sexual orientation? That's majoring on the minors. And, you know, I believe, generally speaking, 90% of the country is just live and let live. You do whatever you want. But I'm going to put the best people in my technician vehicle that I can for my client. And I don't really care about any of that other stuff.
No, and you know what? There's a person of whatever out there, you know, with every ethnicity, there's someone that can help you no matter what. Your business, like when you look at my business, it looks like a rainbow of people that work there. It really does. I was paying attention yesterday at my morning meeting, really how different everyone in there is. And you know what? We all are totally unique. I don't care what color my skin is. I'm totally unique from you or anybody else. Even if I think like you, I'm totally unique from you. And, I'm trying to find someone who can listen to the value proposition we're creating and understand how do we take this forward in the marketplace so that people resonate with us. That's what I'm looking for. And whoever can do that is who I want to
Part of the
employ to
team.
do that. And that's who I want to follow to do that as well. Like, I feel like right now, and I hate to get on political topics, but a guy named Mark Robinson, if you haven't met Mark yet, is a guy that is passionate about North Carolina. We were talking one day in my office, and he said, when I was getting ready to buy a house the first time, I got turned down for my first mortgage. And he said, it didn't have anything to do with my skin color. It didn't have anything to do with it was my credit score. And I had not listened to my parents and done the right things to keep that in the right place. And when I set about working on that instead, I couldn't blame banks anymore. And I had to fix my own physical house. And he did. And, I'm like, that encourages me, because I think people who come from meager beginnings, or if you haven't failed a few times, or if you don't realize you fail a little bit forward every day, and that's my point, fail a little bit forward.
Right.
Like whenever I trip, I actually springboard off of that trip. Like, the best thing that ever happened to me in my real estate career was 2008 banking crisis, that everyone else was paralyzed and thought this is the worst thing ever. Well, I had employees. I had people that had to make a living. So while everybody else paused, I put a plan in motion to immediately figure out, okay, how do I help builders get through this? How do I help banks feel comfortable talking to? Now, none of those were my job, but they became my job, and I've kept them my job since. Out of 08, my business exploded out of the back end of it. Before people started talking about we were in a recovery, I was already month over month just killing it and growing when everybody else was shrinking.
Right. So took a little break there. I've been drinking a lot of coffee this morning, but I'm really glad you went into that, because my natural tendency, and people watching this may not know, but we play poker. Like, we both enjoy poker. I would consider my style like tight aggressive. I'll make moves once in a while, but I'm not a wild man, And my natural tendency right now in 2024, my natural tendency is to get tight and be cautious and, not be exposed. Because I do believe I believe we have some whitewater rapids ahead of us, one way or another, no matter who wins the presidency, by the way. But I've overridden that, and I'm actually lining up capital to acquire some companies right now and working on that. And so I'm going against my natural tendency, because I realize, and this is what you did in 2008, is
by the way, getting ready to do it again right now.
I believe it. I totally believe it, because when most people are, J. Paul Getty, one of the wealthiest people in history at one point, he said, observe the masses and do the opposite. And you can see it in real estate. Like, everybody and their mom was talking about buying an Airbnb, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And, everybody's now that's not renting like it used to. People are getting nervous. I'm not hearing people talking about buying properties anymore.
Guess what? I didn't buy any of those Airbnbs because the land was a great purchase. Buying property is a great purchase. But why would someone be more willing to stay a night in a luxury hotel? I'd prefer the luxury hotel than the Airbnb if the prices are going to be similar, and they kind of have to be to cover that. Once interest rates started going up, that's a real mortgage payment now. And so
it's not renting.
It's not free
Right.
anymore to rent these things out. And by the way, they don't realize how much marketing dollars go into getting someone to be willing to come stay at my luxury Four Seasons,
Right.
or to stay at other hotels and the accommodations. And you certainly can't do that in one house, and you don't have a marketing budget to do it either. I really stayed off of that bandwagon because I saw like, you don't recreate new things in the middle. Like real estate itself, the core principal values of investing have never changed. There's always a new tick up or a new click that's out there, a new fad. They're constantly out there. Leaders of an industry can't fall prey to that. A lot of those people that you heard their voices are now in financial trouble because they took on so many of these subleases because they never bought the buildings.
Yeah.
They took over a lease from someone and then tried to sublease it to a business and said they owned 15 of these Airbnbs. They didn't own any houses. They just had properties leased that now they've given back to the person who owned the property. And now that person's in a deficit because nobody's paying their rent like they were or were supposed to have been. That's just one example of that. But when you go through something like '08, which was a real financial crisis, and we have one of some type about every 10 years. When we came out of '08, though, we'd been on the longest march of success that this country had ever seen. The only thing that happened after '08, we've gone on now the longest success route we've ever been on again. But because of '08 and us having the memory of '08, we're trying to recreate an '08. We constantly, as people, fear, if we've ever fallen down and skinned our knee one time, we're afraid we're going to fall down every time we walk out of a building. It was a freak thing. There was a banana peel that one day, and now you're going to prepare for that banana peel for the rest of your life. Unfortunately, a lot of business owners do that, and way too many politicians do it. Every year since '08, they've been trying to wait for our next economic failure. Every year, no matter who's in charge, every year they're talking about it, except for one span 4 years ago where somebody was actually talking about how we were going to go in a positive direction, but took us too positive. How can you be too positive? You can't be. You know, we throw that word out there, and I know you're going to get to the topic, inflation, and we don't even want to talk about it. That's not the cause of anything.
You know, so I think one of the principles that I would like, if somebody's listening to this, you know, how do you position yourself in 24 from someone who's been there and done that? I was a business owner in 2008. I got stuck by builders. Because you're right, that memory is there and the pain is there. But again, we learn through that. And in hindsight, I could have been more aggressive. There are things that I could have done that I'm doing now. So how do you get positioned for that? I guess we could just jump right into that. I do want to talk about a real estate specific topic real quick before we get into that. So the NAR settlement, National Association of Realtors, you mind elaborating on that? Because there's been a lot of noise about this. Get your thoughts on that.
What's really funny is that's exactly what it is noise. Just like it has been. Now, North Carolina, thank goodness, there was always a disclosure in every listing agreement that said that we were paying a portion of our commission as a listing agent to a buyer's agent. And the sellers gave us permission to do it, to either pay it to a dual agent, a seller's agent, or a buyer's agent. By the way, everybody thinks the types of agency that are available to protect people are the same everywhere. They're not. Only 19 states of the 50 even have buyer's agency, and they don't understand why we have it. But the sellers in all those states are also still the people who are paying the commission ultimately. The house itself, built into the house price, is a commission. When every home that's been sold, even the ones that sell for sale by owner, there was an agent involved somewhere that got some portion of it. Very rarely is it an exchange of hand to hand, almost never. So this lawsuit started in 3 states, that had listing agreements that said, I'm going to charge you 6%. It didn't say anything about you were going to take a portion of that and give to someone else. But you know what? In most businesses, if I pay you a sum today, you don't tell me who you're going to pay out of what I pay you. But unfortunately, in our business, that's really what they were looking at is, okay, a listing agent is collecting money, but not only is he employing people to help him sell that house, he's actually sharing a portion of his commission with someone else. But I, as a seller, he didn't disclose to me that he was doing that. I knew that there was another agent that showed up at the closing table, but I assumed somebody else was paying them. But the amount they were paying never changed. They paid the amount they agreed to. It's just that person decided to give it to other folks. Well, North Carolina has always been on the leading edge of everything. And we had buyer's agency enter our market back in the 90s. And, you know, we've learned to become comfortable with it. We're a due diligence state now. We used to be an earnest money state. Now due diligence is here. And that's how people get secure in transactions. But this NAR lawsuit, at the heart of it, was over the fact that listing agents were going to sellers, collecting a sum, and not acknowledging that they were going to pay a portion of it to someone else. In North Carolina, our contracts always did that. And by the way, since the beginning of time, or in my real estate world, which has been 41 years now, the first thing my first boss told me the first day we went in is there is no such thing as a fixed rate of a commission. All commissions are negotiable. That was the first lesson I learned in real estate. And you know what? The better you get in real estate, the more you can charge, and you can stay more stable with being able to project. How many businesses that really try to project their earnings don't know what their earnings are going to be?
Right.
You know, in our case, if I can start being able to achieve a certain commission rate every single time I sell something, then I can start predicting how to run my business better. And I've done a good job at that during my career. That's the thing a lot of people struggle with, but this lawsuit is right at the heart of that. It started in 3 states up north, and unfortunately, and I've given a ton of money to the NAR during my career, a normal consumer doesn't even know what the NAR is.
Right.
They think it's National Rifles. They have no idea that it's a realtor organization even. But we as realtors, because some of them are panicked about, am I going to get paid or not, have started freaking out about it and making a bigger deal out of it. Like every problem that comes up, the people who are going to do best go right by it and pretend it didn't even hardly exist. For us, the only thing we've had to do different in our listing agreements in North Carolina is now we put into that listing agreement that the commission's negotiable. Now, the person we were sitting in front of always knew, or if they didn't know, I wonder why they always asked me if it was negotiable or not.
Right.
They had that feeling. Now the language, it actually says all commissions are negotiable in the language. Now, outside of that, one thing we've done that's a major step back. Before a buyer can, buyer's agent or seller's agent can show a house to a buyer now, they have to have an agency agreement signed with that person. So imagine the first time I meet you, haven't even been in a house with you yet, you have to agree to work with me right then. You don't know if I know what I'm doing or not. How is that fair to you as a consumer? Wouldn't you like to, like when I go into a clothing store, when I go in, if one person, everybody in there walks up and says, hey, may I help you? I say no to everybody until one person starts paying attention to the clothing I'm pulling off the rack. And that person brings me a whole wardrobe over here to get dressed in. And like, okay, yes, I'll work with you because you're providing value
Right.
to me as a service. Unfortunately, what this lawsuit settlement, the NAR, and I am a member, and I am a high donator. So when I say this, it's going to be unpopular, but I'm going to say it. I believe they sold realtors in the United States down the river in trying to settle a lawsuit to save money instead of doing the right thing, because there was a very limited number of states that were functioning this way. And even those limited number of states that were functioning this way were not charging sellers any more than they told them they were going to. They signed a legal contract up front. They just gave portions of their money to people that weren't representing the seller. They were representing a buyer. And they didn't have permission from that seller to give a portion of it to someone representing someone else's interest. And they felt that maybe the home negotiation went more in that buyer's side because of this money being directed on that side. And I'll tell you why I disagree with that. I believe that buyers and sellers both really determine what the price of a home is anyway. If a buyer sees something and falls in love with it, they're going to pay whatever they can pay.
It's worth more to them.
That's worth to them. If a seller has a brilliant home that's in fabulous condition, that person's house is going to sell for more than the average house like their house does, no matter what happens. And both of them are going to benefit. And if their house is incredible, they're going to negotiate less. If their house looks horrible and needs maintenance, this buyer is going to have an advantage because they've seen other properties that were better. They're willing to live with this one, maybe because of location, but they can improve it. And they're going to have to come out of their pocket to spend the money.
And that's with everything.
They're
That's
going to
with
equal
cars.
out.
That's with everything.
It's whatever you,
Yeah.
it's bread, it's milk, it's whatever
Right.
you're buying in the world. Well, unfortunately, because of this lawsuit, some special interest groups got behind this who are trying to drive the business in another direction. People who could profit out of it, prop people up to do the suing. Well, when it happened, rather than fight, they filed a settlement. Now, unfortunately, what's happened since? The settlement's under appeal right now. The reason it's under appeal is an arbitration versus actually going to court. It hasn't been heard in court. The party that won, which is why the settlement took place, once they realized the percentage that the attorneys were collecting out of it, because the attorneys did it on a pro bono up front, but with a percentage on the back, and my understanding is, and I could be incorrect, but I've heard
30,
they were
40%
getting
or something.
65% they were receiving, and the folks suing were only receiving 35. They're unhappy with the amount they received. So now they've come back and they're trying to attack all the people that weren't covered in the NAR settlement so that they can get paid more. And I don't, in a normal arbitration hearing, once you agree to binding arbitration, if one side appeals, then it goes to court. And my understanding is that that's where it's headed again. I hope not, but either way, the reality in North Carolina, and I can only speak for North Carolina, we disclosed always who was receiving portions of commissions. There was a portion going to, and the seller had to give us permission. If you didn't want a buyer's agent to show your home, then only seller subagents could collect a commission. If you gave us permission, a buyer's agent, a dual agent, or a seller subagent could collect the commission. Now, I've always advised my sellers, listen, the more people that look at our property, the more likely we are to achieve the price you want to achieve and the highest level. So I hope that you'll agree to pay a portion of my commission to these other folks. But if you don't, I still charge this amount, and that's what I'm going to collect. I would rather have help. How many industries does someone get their paycheck and I say, you know what? I'm going to function better if I give a portion of my paycheck to my coworker and we both do this together,
Right.
that's the way it's been working for the entire 40 years I've been in business. Since I said buyer's agency didn't get interjected into our market until the 90s, I started in business in the 80s. In the 80s, everybody was a seller sub-agent. When they brought buyer's agency to our market, we were terrified of it. Now it's normal business here and nobody's afraid of it. The sellers accept the fact that a portion's going to be paid to the person on the other side, but that person wouldn't get to their house otherwise. They are friends with this other agent who represents their interest, and they're not going to show your property otherwise.
You should want everybody to see your house. Why would you want to limit yourself as a consumer?
That's what the lawsuit was about, is not only limiting who could see it, but changing who paid it. And the reason they wanted the buyer to be responsible for the payment, which when the buyer pays the ultimate price, they did pay for it. They both did.
Right.
The seller wrote a check for that commission at closing, or at closing it was paid, but the ultimate price had that commission built into it, which the buyer was paying. Mm-hmm. The sellers are feeling like, well, the buyer should have paid that separate from, and I should have achieved this whole price. The unfortunate thing, the buyer, if they are on a limited income, or let's say it's a first home buyer, and they only have 3% saved up to go buy, and it requires a 3% down payment to buy it.
In addition to your mortgage and all this other stuff.
Right. They're not able, without that down payment, and they got to have 2 months in reserve. They got to have 12 months insurance. They got to have all this money saved up to go buy. Well, if now they're responsible for writing a check separately to their buyer's agent who's going to show them, now they don't have the money saved any longer to go forward to buy.
Right.
And no one made it available that it would. First time in history, our president stepped up in front of cameras and told a lie. He stepped up and said that realtors make too much in transactions, that the average realtor makes $10,000 per transaction. Holy cow. If we did, I have missed the boat. Please go back and go collect all mine because I'm missing them. That's not what they should have engaged in. The Justice Department got involved in this settlement as well and has said that, yes, we should change this. Really wrong. Getting involved in private business is not what when nothing illegal has been done. Everything was done according to contracts. It's sad, but guess what? Talking about this is as much topic as I'm ever going to give to it. Because whatever the results of it are, or whatever the new rules I've got to work under are, wherever it is, I'm going to flourish in those and I'm going to figure out the solutions. If I sit around and talk about a problem too often, all I do is make it a bigger problem. I'm going to go solve it for me, and I already have, and we're past it. And I told my agents in our meeting yesterday, we're not discussing this anymore. We weren't doing anything wrong to begin with. And what should have happened is our local RRAR, which is just our Raleigh board, and our state should have stepped up and said, we shouldn't have to participate in this lawsuit because we were already doing things the way this lawsuit suggests. We'll add the line that commissions are negotiable, leave us out of the settlement. Instead, there are national brands in every state, big brands. I work for Coldwell Banker, but there are a multitude of large brands out there. All of those large brands operate in multiple states. So leaving us out for them didn't really work unless everybody became an independent agent. And that wouldn't benefit us either, because the network of people that I know around the world are one of the things that helps me to be successful. I'm still going to know those people if they become independents. I just won't have a way to network with them. And unfortunately, that's the way most businesses run. Most businesses have a network, or they become members of organizations to go meet each other like kind in other places to figure out how to do things. Well, the lawsuit, because of the fact that there are brands across states, they all agreed to settle this lawsuit that was ridiculous to begin with. They agreed to settle because it was going to cost them more if they didn't settle to go to court. And isn't that a sad thing? When you know you're innocent of something, you avoid court because it's going to cost more to go to court than to just settle with someone and get out of it. And unfortunately, that's the truth of our economic times.
I think there are times where, and again, this is just me, but out of principle, I'm going to dig in on a lot of things.
And this was one of those times.
You should.
This
sounds like
should
you
have
should
been
have.
a principle,
Right.
But instead, we have been donating money for years to NAR. They have a ton of money in their war chest
For something like this.
for something like this. So rather than fight, they decided, you know what, we can limit how much we spend
Protect the war
out
chest.
of our war chest by doing this. And it's very unfortunate. And I wish our state had stepped up and said, okay, well, don't worry about us. We're already okay. But because of the national brands, they really couldn't, because the higher up people that are donating money are members of those brands, no matter what the brand is, and they don't really want that to happen. Now, all of them realize now this appeal's going on that was a mistake. Too late. I'm past it. Let's stop talking about it. Let's stop putting it on Facebook. Let's stop making it a conversation. It's like, listen, when we were young, we got a shot in our arm to keep from getting polio. We received a vaccine. I'm not still talking about I could get polio right now. I took my vaccine. Get over it. Okay, we're past this. Let's get on to the next. The last big one we faced was black mold. Before that, it was radon in water. Before that, it was radon in the ground.
It's always going to be something.
There's always going to be something, because our human nature wants to find what's wrong with what's good instead of being happy that it's good. While we're laying on our bed at night and we're comfortable and everything's going great, I wonder if a tree could hit my house today. You're plan for the 1% instead of the 99. How does that make sense?
Well, that's the Anthony Robbins talks about this. It's the survival. It's a survival instinct that we've probably had genetically passed on to us for a long time, but that's part of consciousness and leveling up with humanity and people awakening, and certainly some of the stuff I want to get into. But I guess that's why, from an outsider perspective, I was around real estate. I was married to someone who owned a real estate company, and when I heard this, I'm like, I don't understand what the big deal is. Like, it was always kind of talked about anyway, but it seemed like a mountain out of a molehill from my point of view, and you explaining it in detail. It's kind of a mountain out of a molehill for North Carolina anyway.
And the only people that are going to get injured out of it are first home buyers and our warriors, our soldiers, our veterans. That's who's going to get injured. We have loan processes in place right now where a veteran, whether former or present, can get 100% financing through the VA.
That's my first mortgage was a VA.
Okay. So guess what? Now, if they have to pay...
Now I have to come...
Right. You have
a veteran
to come
has
to
to
the
come with
table
3%?
to pay this other person this money. Now we're injuring veterans as well.
So if you're buying a $400,000 house, you need to bring an extra $12,000 now.
That's right. It's unrealistic and it's unfair. And I pray that we have some kind of switch in the Justice Department where somebody steps in and says, this is wrong. We shouldn't be injuring our veterans. We haven't made accommodations in our mortgage industry or in the VA to allow them to finance any portion of that if they don't have it. We're still at the same guidelines that a buyer has to have X amount of money to be able to qualify to purchase. Well, now they got to have a bigger X so that they can pay this fee over here unless. And what we're doing and what everybody in our state's doing, one of my good friends, Gillum Kittrell, reached out and we talked yesterday. His company has decided, hey, no matter what, we're going to tell sellers we won't accept their listing unless they agree to pay a portion of the commission to the other side. I'm going to do the same thing because I don't want to do business alone. No, why would you want to scale a mountain by yourself? Who are you going to high five when you get to the top? I want to have a compatriot somewhere else that I can high five. When we solve all the problems and this one house closes, high five not only the buyer, the seller, the other agent, and all of us get together and be excited. All four of us should be. Like, that's what teamwork is. I don't want to be an individual doing business only by myself. And now having to represent in every transaction, both sides of every transaction, because some people require a different way of being handled. And we're upsetting this has been how business has been done in the United States forever. We're going to change a whole apple cart when there's not a need to change it. We're looking for, right now, every marketplace tells me that there's a problem with affordable housing. Everybody says there isn't enough housing for first home buyers. You're going to take them out of play because of that? So now they don't even get to buy a house because they can't afford to.
So Jim, when I'm hearing this as an outsider, and again, not to sound like some kind of conspiracy theorist or something, but it just seems like there are large macro agendas pushing. So just as an outsider, it seems like there's some type of agenda that's pushing this, looking for a solution to something that wasn't really a problem. Does that sound crazy?
No, it's not crazy. And it's actually what's happening. Because a small seller wasn't going to form this big network of lawsuit. There are some companies out there, I won't name them because I don't certainly want to be sued by these folks either because they have a lot of money. Mm-hmm. There are some companies out there that have been trying to change how real estate was transacted. They own large companies that do nothing but schedule showings. So our own MLS, we as a whole, all the realtors in the Triangle got together and decided we would like to hire one entity to make the appointments with sellers for all our showings. We chose a company. The particular company we chose now makes those phone calls for us. That company also owns a real estate company or is owned by a real estate company. That now, imagine in your business, if tomorrow I said, well, you know what, Brian, why don't you give your whole database to one of your competitors,
major national
with their
company,
phone numbers, their names, their addresses, and all their pertinent including when your contract's going to run out with you, so that they can prepare to take your business away. Would you want to do that?
Of course not. That's ridiculous.
Well, unfortunately, we as an industry have put ourselves in a position of that nature. I won't name companies, but we have. And unfortunately, they're behind in the background of these lawsuits that are being settled as well. And we, unfortunately, are still using those companies. But even if the lawsuit stuff hadn't happened, just imagine that the company I'm going to employ to make appointments for me this month has all of my sellers and my buyers' personal information. And the moment my listing agreement's getting ready to expire, they know, and they own another type of company that does the same thing I do. They could engage immediately before anyone else knew. They would know, and they could go engage and take a portion of that business. And they were already doing that, and that wasn't aggressive and large enough, and they wanted to take over the whole business. So what do? You get behind some people doing a class action lawsuit and drive a wedge. And I would tell you, most class action lawsuits, it's never the individual that's really injured that benefits the most. And it's not them that drives it. It's always either an eager attorney or, and I don't want to, I have a lot of attorney friends. There are bad people in every profession.
Sure.
Or It's another opportunistic company that drives it, that sees if we get rid of our competition, we become a monopoly. We have laws in place, and the Justice Department has always protected us from those types of things
In the past.
And right now, for the first time in history,
They're
they
on the
are
other
not
side.
looking at things fairly, in my opinion. And unfortunately, so a settlement took place that was unjust. But who cares? It's the new law of the land. I'm going to learn to live with it until there's a new justice system that hopefully change it. But listen, we are in a free enterprise, fair market country. That's what we've always been. We had protections set up to avoid monopolies. If you remember the AT&T breakup years ago, that was all about a telephone industry monopoly.
Right.
And we
Standard
fought
Oil.
all those battles. I believe, unfortunately, we're going back in a direction where we're going to have to fight some of those battles again. Unfortunately, I see wars we fought in the 60s and 70s, even in my lifetime, that I watched on social issues as well, that are all unraveling right now. And we're going to have to go fight them all again. I mean, it's like I told you before that my child is going blind. So I was so happy that the ADA is in place to protect his rights as a handicapped individual. But those rights aren't there anymore. So we got to go back and fight that too. This new thing, the only fear I have with the NAR lawsuit, now the MLSs cannot advertise the commission payout that's going to be paid to the buyer's agent that comes to show it. It's not public knowledge anymore. Transparency is gone. So if I like you and you're showing one of my properties, I may say, hey, I'm going to cooperate with you. If I don't like you, then I could say, even though I've got paperwork back here signed separately, and I would hope no one would do this, but you leave it to chance and put it in the hands that this person could say, there's a zero payout for buyer's agents, and that person may have in a contract signed with their person that says, if the seller's not going to pay a portion, you don't require me to show that property any longer. Now that seller's injured, and discrimination can take place.
Right.
What if the person is, a different political party from me? What if the person likes different ice skates than I? Whatever the problem is, I just believe we're taking a step backwards. Transparency is how you keep corruption out of businesses.
Right.
Now that you can't advertise it through the MLS, which was a neutral third party, we advertised where we were going to pay. Now I can put it on my individual website, but there are companies springing up to sell us the service of advertising what we're going to pay out as a commission rate, and they're not governed or regulated in any way, shape, or form. What if they do that? Why are they more capable than the local MLS that is regulated? That if they do something incorrectly, we have people, and we have a real estate commission that can step in and protect the consumer.
Right.
These other for-profit companies can run this kind of business, and we can advertise on their site that we're going to pay something. Now, what happens at one of those if one of their clerical people inputs a commission incorrectly, but now I'm responsible to pay it, and I say, no, that's your error. I'm not paying your error. Well, the real estate commission's not involved anymore because this other entity is not a real estate firm. They're just somebody willing to sell it. And by the way, they came to a local meeting that our local MLS office had and started selling their service. Now, my friend asked me yesterday, are you going to join this new service? I'm like, well, first you can advertise it on your own website, but I can't control them.
Right.
I don't know what if they don't like you themselves and they tell you a number that's different than I don't want to be involved in that. I want full transparency.
Right. It just seems like they made something overly complicated and went backwards. I mean, to your point,
Absolutely.
it just, there's all these lawsuits and it went backwards. And the fact there are conflicts of interest behind the scenes, as a consumer, I can't feel good about those steps.
Well, when we decided that lead-based paint was bad for you in 1978, paint companies quit making that kind of paint.
Sure.
So are we going to start making lead-based paint again today because we want to?
Right.
No. Once you fight battles, once buyer's agency was introduced here and we all got okay with how the consumer handles it, it should be accepted. The problem is those other states that never accepted buyer's agency, that were doing things a different way, that was the way their state set up their laws. The rules and regulations state by state are different. Now the federal government's trying to step in and make all the same. That's an overreach, and the same overreach is happening in every branch of government right now. They're trying to make everything go to the federal level, and it shouldn't. No, doesn't matter what the thing is, women's rights, people's rights, whatever the thing is. That's why states were put in place with state and local government, because what happens in Raleigh, North Carolina is different than what happens in Denver, Colorado. Different circumstance, different kind of people, different
markets.
things.
Yeah.
And that's why we set up a state government to legislate it, but then a local government also.
Right.
In this case, local was doing a great job. State was doing a great job. Federal was doing a pretty good job. Now, all of a sudden, federal's going to come in. Daddy doesn't like the way their state's doing business different. Well, guess what? The legal definition in North Carolina, we're a buyer beware state. So that buyer needed the protection of buyer's agency. In California and Florida, they are seller disclosure states. Before you put a house on the market, seller has to have an inspection done on the property to determine what's wrong with it. In our state, that's a buyer thing that happens. There in those two states, since they are seller disclosure states, we fill out a seller disclosure form, but we're a buyer beware state. So if the legal definition that state covers, we can't do things the same way. The legislature has set up laws that are different for those two states. Well, now we've got the federal government coming in and overreaching, and the Justice Department deciding everything everywhere has to be the same. Well, those states up north that chose not to participate in buyer's agency, their state chose. I can't explain why.
Right.
But where those lawsuits happened, that's just what happened.
It's like that old saying, Ronald Reagan, was it the 9 most terrifying words in the English dictionary? It's I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Generally speaking, and this is just, we're talking about principles. Generally speaking, the more centralized the power or authority, the worse things get, in my mind.
Agreed.
And that's
Always.
why a lot of times, to me, it's let the states figure it out. And there's more control.
There is. And the only time the federal government should get involved is when two states are colliding and they can't agree. In this instance, states weren't colliding or disagreeing. These states were doing business one way. Well, here's the overreach. Those companies I told you about that may be behind this were doing business in multiple states. So it's easier for them to require that everybody do things the same way. Their processes
Simplifies
are made
their
simpler,
processes,
right?
yeah.
The same thing happened 4 years ago. Nobody was paying attention. We used to have areas or zones on our map as realtors. And those areas and zones, like North Raleigh, for example, was Area 2. And I knew if a buyer called me and they said they wanted to live in North Raleigh, all I had to do was input Area 2 in the MLS, and those homes would come up, and I could search them easily. Today, they said that was called redlining, and that was a bad thing. And so now, when I enter something in the MLS, all I can do is tell you what city it's in. That's not enough of a clarification. And now you got to go draw a circle on a map to decide what comes in there. What if I draw my circle one house short of yours and I'm trying to show all North Raleigh? Are you happy that the circle, and I physically have to have a skill set now. I go to my computer, I have to use the program to draw a pentagon or circle on my page, and hopefully
What's the difference? Aren't you redlining if you draw a circle or a pentagon?
Well, apparently not.
So if you make your own circle,
my circle's not redlined, but others is.
So if it's automatically created, that's somehow more redlining than if I create the circle? It seems the opposite to me.
Correct. And again, full transparency.
Right.
When we knew what the areas were, everybody was dealing under the same rules.
Right.
Now, what if I only want to show you my listings and I control a large portion of listings in a certain area, and I know another guy has more listings in another? I'll make my circle
around
in my area. That's where the discrimination comes in.
It's not good for the customer.
And unfortunately, the law came in the form of redlining, and of course, then everybody's afraid of being sued by discrimination. And the real truth is, there was a mapping company that was selling their mapping to this other big organization, and they said, when we come to Raleigh, North Carolina, this doesn't fit in our grid system because I'm gonna have to overlay their areas to be able for you to use that in Illinois to try to figure out who's going to buy a house in Raleigh, and I'm going to have to do that with you. Now, every realtor in this market was upset when this happened because people had been doing business this way since I got in the business in the early 80s.
Right.
Have to learn a completely new way to find property. And guess what? These mapping pings, every time it lightnings outside, it knocks the system off. And so now this listing that would go back into the same mapping because it's in there at area 2, now I got to re-input it, send them the zip code and address again so they can make sure I'm in the right place. We took a simple process, made it more difficult because other parts of the country weren't using that same process. A person who worked for that same company I told you I believe is behind this other one came down here, got into our network, told us that other states, and they were talking about Chicago, Illinois at the time, had been sued for redlining in their markets by trying to separate value by these things, and that's what they called redlining. And they were non-discriminatory. And by the way, some areas of Area 2 were great places to buy. Others weren't.
Sure.
It had nothing to do with being in Area 2. It was the fact that this one isn't in as good an area. This one's got road noise. This one's got this.
Right.
This one's got air traffic. Other things were behind that, not what area you put it in.
Right. Oh, everything just seems to be overly complicated. I think it comes back to, in part, it's just things are so good. People have to find things to have a crisis and create a crisis when there is no crisis. That's
right.
It seems like that. Like, I don't know, but it may just be as simple as a national company has an agenda and the power to influence things to make things happen.
And unfortunately, our political system
is up for sale.
It is up for
Apparently.
sale. And for-profit lobbyist groups have a lot of power, just like, private lobbyist groups do. I mean, for-profit, nonprofit used to mean that we were trying to help people.
Sure.
Now all nonprofit means is the people that work at the nonprofit get paid more because their salaries are not regulated, and the for-profit are more regulated.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. That's something that's just completely been abused. And
correct.
All these political organizations that are nonprofits, people making $150,000 a year doing whatever they do.
Listen, I will be the first to admit we need government. But government has gotten out of control. One of my great friends, a guy named Matt Winslow, is my state senator. my son was having some problems with some ADA compliance stuff over at NC State with his vision issue. Matt stepped in and helped us in housing in a second. I, as a private citizen, had been trying for months to resolve it. Matt resolved it in 3 days. That I'm thrilled that I gave money politically to Matt for that. I absolutely am. That's not why I did.
Right.
I did it because I thought he would be fair and do the right thing, and he did.
Mm-hmm.
I like that kind of government. The kind of government I don't like is the one that overreaches, and we're adding so many people to it. If you look right now under our current administration at how many new governmental employees exist in positions that didn't exist a few years ago, it's crazy. Government getting bigger does not make it better.
Well, it doesn't, and I think part of the thing, Jim, that we talked about this a little bit before, is that government generally doesn't produce anything. I would say, not even generally. They just generally, they don't produce anything, right? And so business people have to produce, and the government should be a level playing field. They should level the playing field, kind of like referees. And I feel that. Not to get too far off topic from what you're talking about, but I feel that not only are they referees now, but they're pulling for one of the teams in a lot of cases.
Yes.
And that's not the job of government.
No, honestly. And it's like, you and I are both big UFC fights.
Mm-hmm.
But what if you have an official sitting in the middle that every time a great grappler gets somebody on the ground, he calls for a break and stands them up. The other guy's a much better puncher, but this grappler's success is getting him on the ground where they can't hit him. And every time they get him down, they're getting ready to win. They're maybe even getting ready to submit the person.
Right.
The official comes in and pulls them up. That's what you're talking about, and that's not the role of government. The role of government is when one party's out of line with another to step in, but that should be so rare. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly nothing to do with the production of business unless one person has a trade practice that's unfair to all. The fact that one works harder, drives harder, cares more, maybe even pays his employees more, maybe has people on his team that are focused and laser focused behind him, he's going to be more successful than the guy that's over here,
right,
and has a bunch of ragtags hanging out that don't help each other.
Right.
Helping other people in that experience is how they're getting better. But unfortunately right now what I'm seeing is we have special interest groups, not all of them from the United States, mm-hmm. that have a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And they are trying to buy a lot of political pull as a result of that. And unfortunately, sometimes parts of our government are for sale, mm-hmm. and that's sad. We are a free enterprise system. I think our founding fathers did a brilliant job setting up our Constitution, how the states should work, how the Fed should work, how we should have different branches of the judicial system.
Really brilliant when you think about it.
The checks and balances were unbelievable. The checks and balances are gone. Mm. We've got one particular branch controlling all. That's not okay. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, and I believe this happened this week. I believe the head of the Secret Service just stepped down.
Resigned, yeah.
And
for some reason had to be convinced to do it.
Yeah, and there's an awful lot of complaint behind that and around that in other places. And you know what? I don't want either of presidential candidates to be in jeopardy. I don't want anybody. If 4 people are running against each other in a political race, it's an ideology. They're talking. Mm-hmm. That shouldn't require someone to have bullets.
Right.
That's not a part of it. And it's funny. Yesterday I was listening, and another podcast put on that. Maybe one of the candidates was not potentially shot with a bullet. Maybe it was a fragment that hit him instead. When my ear cuts open and bleeds and someone's just shot a shot, whether the bullet itself went through or something else it hit went through my ear, either one of them were dangerous.
Multiple shots fired at a political candidate. That should never happen.
When the
Period.
bullet went off, thank God it didn't hit them, and horrible that it hit the young man that it did hit.
Right.
You know, that had no place. And we had a Secret Service that is trained to prohibit that. We have not had a shooting politically since Reagan.
Yeah.
And that was wonderful. You know, we relax sometimes too much.
Sure.
And you hope that's all that happened. But it opens the door for, you know, when all these people were filming, now everybody's got cameras.
Right.
People were filming the person climbing up on the building. When the guy was up there, people are screaming to law enforcement, there's a shooter with a gun, an active shooter right there. Unfortunately, no one responded. How is that possible? And by the way, I've heard this since. The group that they kept showing, the sniper on the other side, that they kept showing is not the person who apparently shot the bad guy. They showed all the footage of this other sniper. They never fired. Another sniper from another location is who shot him. But when you're looking at the video, it showed video of this one, I guess to show that somebody was there trying to help. But who knows? Yes, they were watching, but they didn't participate or shoot the person. They saw the person getting ready to shoot. They're trained to stop and shoot the person, and they didn't.
You know, it's and I always like to say something like this, like, because some people have, I mean, if you're on the right, you're going to say Trump derangement syndrome or something, you know, like that. I just like to say things like this. You can dislike Trump, and you can also agree that there's something very suspect about that whole situation. The fact that, you know, this, as the facts are coming out, this kid was out there flying a drone around hours before the event, before the leading polling person to be president again is going to be speaking. The fact she wouldn't say how many rounds the shooter shot. You come back to something you said earlier. Transparency is a good thing unless you're trying to create narratives. And I believe where conspiracy theories come out is because there's a lack of transparency. Where's the harm in saying this shooter shot 3 times? Well, instantly I go, by the way, I want to say something else. I hope you don't mind me stealing the mic here for a sec. Critical thinking. It's something that for whatever reason, I just think a lot of the public has lost the ability to critically think. And what is thinking? Thinking is asking yourself questions. That's all thinking is. So the Secret Service director wouldn't disclose how many shell casings were on top of the roof from that particular shooter. Why? Well, how could that possibly interrupt some investigation?
Because there was only one shot that went back to kill him. And you heard the difference. If you were listening to the audio, you could hear that other bullet sounded differently, or that other shot sounded different. And they only took one of them when they finally fired. The other person had gotten off multiple that sounded exactly the same. I don't know how many because I wasn't trying to count it.
Right.
But they obviously certainly know how many there were. And I think the problem is they didn't want to acknowledge this person fired this many times and we only fired once. Or they fired this many times before we reacted when we were set up to react.
Or something else. You know, I did hear that there was two shots from one from local law enforcement. I just heard this yesterday. Again, I could be wrong. You know, it's as data comes in, right? And so
I hadn't heard this yet.
Yeah. So you're a little busy too. I think I got more time on my hands than you do. But that being said, I heard that a local person took a shot and a Secret Service person took a shot. But again, I hope it did. I hope there were 2 fired. I'm thrilled if multiples were trying to. I heard one of them missed. Both of them, 2 people took shots. One of them missed. One of them hit. That being said, what's the harm in talking about how many shell casings were there? And it leads me to believe the fact the door was so wide open for this to happen in the first place. He had been denied Secret Service. RFK Jr. was denied Secret Service, which is ridiculous to me. But Nikki Haley got Secret Service. You know, to me, there's the establishment, and then there's the people that are, in my mind, in my words, people that are looking out for the people versus looking out for the machine that is the establishment. That's my personal point of view. But I just think, coming back to the whole transparency thing, if you're the Department of Justice and you're the Secret Service, there should be transparency. There should be a level playing field, and you should be transparent because you're trying to be the most level playing field you can be. When there's not transparency, it shows that you're in on the game, so to speak, and you're standing that grappler up when you shouldn't be.
And why should we know? We employ them.
Yeah, you work for me.
That's the really funny thing is those tax bills that we all hate is how we employ these folks.
Right.
And that's where it comes from. And a government official is really an employment of the people.
Of the people.
Whether they're hired or elected doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in government, you do work for the people. You may not agree with the people. You may not like the people, but you do work for them.
Right. And that's where, you know, I love these organizations like Judicial Watch that they have to constantly sue the government under Freedom of Information Act. And then you've got these politicians, I won't name them, but one politician who's using 3 different aliases on his emails. Obviously, we all know about Hillary using her own email server, so it's not subject to Freedom of Information request. We just have to get back to a place where if you're in the government, your whole life is going to be transparent. If you don't like it, don't run the job. Don't do the job if you don't like it.
Listen, what's horrific to me is that there are people that are senators that have come out and publicly stated that they're sorry that the guy missed. And they've publicly stated this.
It's unbelievable.
Now, I personally, it doesn't matter which party I was voting for.
Mm-hmm.
I wish to goodness they had all missed. I wish the gentleman who innocently got shot in the stands hadn't been shot. I wish the shooter had not been killed. I wish they had injured him enough to be able to take control of him and keep him from shooting, but go get him the mental or physical health. There was something wrong. I don't care who was paying him. I don't care if it was just his own personal agenda. Something was wrong with that young man to make him want to go get attention that way. Mm-hmm. I watched a podcast that talked about how much he was bullied in school. And, you know, I know people who were bullied in school. Sad. And I've watched it, and it changes the kind of people they become. And I would love to see us help those people instead of be excited that someone got killed.
Right.
We have one life. Other than when we go to heaven, we live forever. But we have one life here on earth, and I don't want to see anybody's ended shortly. I don't want to see someone maimed. Like I've spoken to you before about my child that's going through a vision issue. I don't want anybody handicapped as a result of a bullet or anything else. I'm thrilled we have protections in place, but I want my snipers skilled enough that they can decide where they're going to. The other person can't pull the trigger before they pull first.
Right.
And, you know, unfortunately, and like I am a huge law enforcement supporter.
Sure.
I am so terrified when they are on their job and every day they go in, they risk their lives for us to keep us safe. That terrifies me. And, you know, I'm 100% their supporter, just like I am of our military, and I am of our Secret Service as well.
Sure.
What was amazing to watch is the Secret Service people who did throw their body around the other person to try and protect themselves. Mm-hmm. That's amazing to actually watch. But I also see an elderly man get shot when he's just speaking his voice. Mm-hmm. Like, what happened to freedom of speech? Mm-hmm. Why is freedom of speech only freedom of speech when people agree with you? They get to say what they want to say. We have protesters that go get permits to protest that are supposed to just be speaking. Instead, they go tear apart businesses,
Right.
break windows out of places, do damage to property. We don't even put them in jail because we say they had a right to speak. My voice doesn't break windows.
Right. You know, I've been saying this for a long time, Jim, is that freedom of speech has been under attack, and for a while now. And it was a conspiracy theory for a while, but everybody knows there's censorship, there's government. The FBI was paying Twitter to censor certain people, things like that. That's not what my tax dollars should be. My tax dollars shouldn't be used to violate my rights. That's the Constitution is not an option.
Well, I'm frustrated sometimes. I'll post something on Facebook, or someone else posts something, and all I do is respond back. I don't use one curse word in what I say. I don't really even say anything of a negative nature. I just either might say, hey, I agree with you, or I may just give a slight opinion of mine on the other end. I've done that and then received back things that say mine's blocked because the nature of my comment being like I would say a curse word on the internet. I'm not doing that.
Right.
But that's the way it came back, and that's why I was censored for saying something. And you know what? I will tell you, while I fully acknowledge being very conservative in terms of how I do things, I tell you right now, and we had it happen in my meeting yesterday. One person stood up. I was giving away $1,000 yesterday, $100 at a time, to give to organizations that need help in my business. So I went around the room and I let each person say who and what. SPCA was one of the groups that definitely got money. Teachers got some money yesterday because they have to pay for all the books and all the classrooms set up now. So we did that. Mental health, there were a lot of different ways. Women who'd been first, whatever you can imagine, we had hit. Some people named some big charities that I happen to know how much the CEOs of those charities make, and how little actually goes to the people who need help. And I suggested we not use those. But two came up. One person in my crowd said, let's give money to the Republican Party. Another person said right after that, let's give money to the Democratic Party. I didn't give money to either one as a result of that, because I believe they both have organizations raising money for them. But I applauded both of them, and I said, you know what? I'm so thrilled that I have an organization where we all love each other, we all work together, and we don't care which side of the political aisle the other one's on. Now, when you hear one person's conspiracy theories, you don't like it, and the other person doesn't like yours either. One of you listens to Fox, one of you listens to CNN. And by the way, there's an infiltration in both of them.
Sure.
People from both of those organizations have been fired in the last 5 or 6 years for doing what they were hired to do. They were hired to run a program, give their view of something, but because their view was different than the station wanted it to be that moment, they lost their job. Now they're on some podcast or independent network, and a lot of those people are making more money now than they were when they worked for either of these two organizations, but they don't have people telling them what they can and can't say.
Right.
And that's really pure democracy. The problem is how they're heard. If they're putting their podcast on social media,
YouTube or something,
and that social media
suppressed.
source decides, that's not something I really like, they'll suppress it.
Right.
And now you have no way to go do it. And, it's funny. I've heard more and more of those people say, next thing you know, I'm going to have to start doing everything on Snapchat like teenagers do, so that my view's only seen for a second. And once people see it, it's gone, so nobody can cut it off.
Two things I want to say about that. And I do believe there's a shift coming, but back to your employees that had a difference of opinion. One's got a conspiracy theory, one says it's a conspiracy theory, whatever. Go to lunch, sit down, exchange ideas, exchange information, understand why do you feel that way. And maybe at the end of the thing, maybe at the end of lunch, you still agree to disagree. But I can't tell you how many times I've sat there and talked to people and they will rattle off things that I just know are flat out true because I've done the digging, but they don't want to hear it. We have a mutual friend that we actually don't talk much anymore. And he would say some of the most outlandish stuff. And I'm like, Sean, what are you talking about? But what do you mean inflation is better? What are you talking about? And he would get mad at me. And it's like, I love you. I care about you. I don't want you, number one, saying ridiculous stuff. But the other thing is evaluate your data, evaluate your sources. It's if I didn't care, I wouldn't say anything. Yeah. If I didn't care about, like someone has reached out to me in the last year or so, and they're like, why do you talk about that stuff? It's going to hurt your business, blah, blah, blah. It's like, because I'm not selfish.
Right.
I care about people.
Right.
That's why I'm concerned about it. That's why I will have a voice. I'm willing to take the shots. I've lost customers that didn't like my point of view on something, but I was always willing to say, let's go grab lunch. Let's talk about it.
I hope that my point of view isn't so, no matter where it is. And mine changes. I don't know if yours does,
Yeah,
but I mean,
it has.
Truly, as I age, I'm able to understand other people better. Mm-hmm. And also as I age, wouldn't you like if I had to go back and be my 25-year-old self, I would love to have the energy and all that. There is no chance you could get me to go back and be my 25-year-old self because I would have to leave the discernment I've gained over time. I'd have to leave my brain here. My dad told me that when he was my age. And I'll tell you, I was a lot younger. My dad died very early. But he told me that, and it resonated, but I thought, oh no, you'd rather be young no matter what. Now I'm exactly where he was, and I would rather keep the knowledge that I've gained than get my youth back. And that's different than a lot of people. People are trying to restore their youth. I'd rather keep the knowledge and means if it means I'm going to die sooner, I live my life out and I stayed true to what I believed in.
Sure. Well, I just think coming back to, I don't want to lose this thought is that, with the censorship, it's not just you're suppressing ideas and you're suppressing knowledge. By the way, if you support people that do censorship, you're hamstringing yourself. You're only getting information they want you to know, whatever that is. But the thing is, and I've said this, is that when you censor people are going to be heard. At some point, they're going to be heard. And if they can't be heard, then what is the next step? It's violence.
And everybody says reality never changed. You know what it really actually does? I'll give you an example. When I was a child, I learned in my science class that there were 9 planets. Now they say there are 8.
Yeah.
And it's changed because of how they view Pluto as not being a planet any longer. My child learned completely different science than I learned. Mm-hmm. Okay. Technology improved to have their argument. I don't know what's right and what's wrong anymore. Sure. There are things like that happen, and hopefully over time, some of these people who have ideas that put them in conflict with each other, hopefully over time they sway back and forth and realize, what, I learn a little bit from this kind of person and I learn a little bit from this kind of person. I feel like I'm a well-rounded person because I've exposed myself to everybody always and wasn't trying to. Now, you gravitate to people that you enjoy doing things more with, like poker players, for example. Sure. I love playing poker, so when I play, that's a whole community in itself. But you're talking about a diverse community. Mm-hmm. That's why their playing styles are as different as they are as well. And are there arguments that occur? There are, but they get settled quickly. And we have people in place in each of those things to legislate what's right and what's wrong. Mm-hmm. There are rules we play by. When we're following the rules and people decide to change the game, that's where there's a problem.
Right.
if math now is not about 1 + 1 = 2, and if you get close, that as long as you did the paperwork right, that's the right answer. Boy, then I guess eventually people aren't going to be able to do addition.
Right.
There's going to be a problem, and there is. I mean, those things are underlying now. I want in my lifetime, which won't happen, all wars to end. I want people to get along. We know that's not going to happen. And if it did, and I don't care whether you have the same faith I do or not.
Mm-hmm.
If it did, then no one would ever want to go to heaven. Jesus won't have to come back.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait till he comes.
Yeah. Well, coming back to I think it's so important to understand that government is there to be somebody. They're the referee. They establish the rules of the game, and we can change the rules of the game if everybody agrees. But when you have, I'm going to pick on the Democrat Party here, when you have a situation where, like the border, well, we're going to ignore the laws on the books because we believe X. Okay, well, you just opened Pandora's box. We all want people to come here to this country. Mustafa sitting right here off like most of the immigrants I meet are some of the nicest, most wonderful
Absolutely.
people.
And they came here because they wanted to.
I want as many as we can here, but
we all came from somewhere,
right?
And I'm glad we're all here,
right?
I have no problem with that. But listen.
But it's the law. Follow the law to get here.
But here's an example of what you're saying, and I'm certainly not trying to make this political, but I'm going to make this statement. When one candidate steps down, and there's been a process how that candidate was selected,
mm-hmm.
and you don't go back to that same democratic process to decide who that next candidate, you just name the next person in line. Chosen. That's not okay. And that doesn't work anywhere. And listen, by the way, last time the party that now Trump represents didn't want him. But the people voted him in as the selection, and that party had no choice but to accept that as who their candidate was. I believe that's how, when the political process works properly, and I don't care whether you like someone or you don't like somebody. That's not important.
What's the process?
Right.
And coming back to the border, to wrap that thought up, like most of the people I know are welcoming, bring lots of people here. There's great needs. This is an amazing country. However, if you want more people here, they have to come through a legal process. And if we need to improve the process, the politicians should be expedite it, improve the process, make things better and more efficient versus circumventing the system.
Information is out there to decide who is dangerous and who's not dangerous, better than it's ever been in the history of time. But we're making the process longer in everything. Even if it's getting on a plane, it takes longer to get on one now than ever before. Right. We're getting ready to switch to this real ID for plane to get on planes. And already yesterday when I was getting on a plane, it took my picture, and then the guy was looking at my driver's license, and I didn't look directly in the camera, so it didn't recognize me at first. And then it finally did recognize me, and the guy said, "Oh boy, you've aged a lot since you had your picture taken." Well, like I was 6 years ago and I had my picture taken the last time.
Right.
And the guy was like, "Yeah, you got a beard now. You didn't have one back then, so you're a little bit different to look at." And all that's true, but think about the information that went involved in making that decision. Right. They could tell, and you can't protect yourself but so much. After you've tried the best you can, you got to accept the results. Mm-hmm. That's where we should get back to everywhere. Like, I'm so thrilled right now. I'm having to get permission from the French government for my child to go over and receive treatment for his blindness. And like, I'm going through the process of being accepted there. It hadn't happened yet. It's taken months. And I can't wait till we do. But there's an example of how all of us can be impacted by borders and things that are fair or aren't fair.
Right.
If we know that we have people that are not safe, that are going to injure people, they shouldn't be allowed. But everybody else, that's what this democracy is about. And I want them all here.
Right.